Hello everyone, I am Giulio Prisco. For this episode of the Turing Church podcast, I'm in conversation with an old friend, about which I'm going to say a few things before giving the floor to her, and a new friend. The old friend is Khannea Suntzu, is a kind of legendary in certain circles. My new friend is Brian Den Hartog. I hope I pronounce your name right.
Yeah, it's Den Hartog. It's a typical Dutch name, but it's correct. Yeah,
that's great. So I promised to say a few things about Khannea because I have known Khannea for a long time. We met in 2005 or 2006 in Second Life, where at that time everyone knew what was Second Life. Today, not so well, but we're going to cover that. Khannea has many good qualities, but at least last I remember, self-esteem was not one of those qualities. So before she starts saying bad things about herself, I want to start with something good, which is that I always considered Khannea as one of the smartest persons I have ever met. Someone extremely perceptive who could do really a lot of good in many fields. I don't really know what she's up these days, and I hope to find out. We met in Second Life, because as I said, 2005 or 2006. I was very much into virtual reality, metaverse, virtual worlds at that time, and reading the online press and blogs, I kept hearing this name, Khannea Suntzu. Just the name was interested and intriguing, so I started reading about her. And at some point, we met in Second Life, and we became friends. You're still my friends. You're still my friend, I hope, aren't you?
Absolutely. You're one of my biggest inspirations in my life.
Oh, well, that's perhaps too much. I think I should say that we don't really agree on everything. Perhaps I should even say that we agree about almost nothing. But I do like to have good friends who disagree with me and bring a perspective that is completely different from mine, things that I wouldn't think about myself. So, Khannea, what are you up to these days?
I'm enjoying life.
That's good.
I functionally retired from the responsibilities of a normal life. I am living in Amsterdam now, after living in The Hague for 7 or so years. Before that, a suburb of The Hague. I had a few transgender related cases, like people that were needed help or needed to reset their life, quite often related to transitions. The last one is very good, very dear friend of mine from Prague. She's going to get married soon, I hear. And she transitioned surgery-wise last November. Other than that, I occasionally write articles, but not particularly often. And no, I wouldn't say that I'm, as relevant to our case, very active in the transhuman community or otherwise. I don't feel I have much of a contribution there left. However, fortunately, a result of that was meeting Brian through Philip van Nedervelde. And Brian wanted to make a documentary about the topic material. And the documentary was like a special project that was supposed to last 15 minutes, but now the content has gone over an hour. So that is, it was a small feature documentary as far as I understand it. And now it's most likely going to the film festivals, and it will touch heavily upon. Yeah.
I really look forward to seeing it. You say that it's going into film festivals. That means it's already done, or is still work in progress?
It's not done, but Brian can most likely answer your questions in more detail.
Yeah, that's great. So Brian, well, first I'd ask you to introduce yourself, because we never met before, and then maybe say something about this documentary, and when can I look forward to seeing it?
Yeah. Well, thank you for inviting me in this nice get together. So my name is Brian. I am a filmmaker. I graduated a few years ago at the Royal Academy for Theater, Cinema and Sound in Brussels. And while I was graduating, I was making a short project. And that film was called A Dialogue in Cyberspace. And that would be, you could describe it as the first step I made as a filmmaker into this field, into this like domain. It was about the virtualization of the human body and how we can still identify ourselves.
A dialogue in cyberspace. Is it online? Can it be found YouTube or things?
You can find it at the festival, the festival Impact. It's a media art festival in the Netherlands. Khannea also was a guest there once.
Right.
Yes, 2013.
Yeah, they have an online channel, Impact channel, and you can find it there. It's a channel with a lot of really interesting films, experimental films related to media art and.
Great. So instead of taking notes now, perhaps you email me, so I have the URL and I can see it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. So you were kind of interested in cyberspace and these things at that time.
Yeah, and so I continued working in this, like, how to say, in this thematic world after I graduated and during my graduation. And in that process, I met, through Philip van Nedervelde, by the way, who back then still lived in Belgium, I met Khannea for the first time in, I think, early 2018. It was?
No, it was after my surgeries or before my surgeries.
Before the
2017. Yeah.
I think late 2017.
Yeah, December.
We met for the first time in The Hague in a cafe, and it was a really inspiring conversation about hundreds of subjects, I guess, or I think we were talking for hours. And I was so intrigued by Khannea's power to envision another version of herself and the world in the future. That and of course I also felt where she is coming from, and how the possibility to change and to become someone that gives some people with a certain past more strength, that it's so powerful and so inspiring for so many people, that I felt, wow, I want to see what this means, this transhuman growth that you can, and of course how it's connected also to the process of surgery she was still in back then as a transgender woman, and how she doesn't just see the process she's in as becoming more feminine, but also becoming something post-human. And this story was so inspiring for me that I thought, wow, can I follow you? Can I be part of your life as a filmmaker? And that at first was a bit scary, I think, for Khannea. So we met several times. And now it resulted in that we are following her for a few years, with certain ups and downs in her life. But also we are not only following the documentary storyline of Khannea, but also fictionalizing with the film the future world that she one day could be living in. And so this is really interesting. It's not a classical documentary where you follow one person in everyday normal life in 2018 to 2022, but we also start to build this future world, and they sort of start to merge together in the film. So I wouldn't describe it myself as a documentary, but like as a film that's somewhere in the middle of documentary and science fiction. And
Brian will attract an actress to portray me.
Yeah. Actually, we are in the middle of that process now.
So you don't interpret yourself.
Sorry?
I thought that in the film Khannea would interpret herself, but you just said that you have an actress to play that role.
The second half, the transition is that my future self will be portrayed by an actress. And the first half of the movie, I will portray myself in all my mundane aspects of my life.
I see. So when I see the film, I'm guessing now, I'm imagining that I will see you played by yourself until, say, 2023, whenever the films come out. And then I will see a few more decades of what may happen to you, and you'll be played by someone else. That sounds great. When do you think the film will come out?
Well, that's always the difficult question with artistic films here in Europe, because we are now filming for a few years for the documentary. I think most of the documentary material is there, and now we are writing the fictional part of the film, casting it, making the production design, all that kind of stuff. So we are now really focusing on what will the fictional world, how can we build it, what will it look like. That's what we are doing now. And if we are finished with this phase, it means that it's called the development phase of a fictional film, then we start seeking money for the actual production, the actual realization for the entire fictional part of the film. And it's all dependent on how fast that goes, how long. As a filmmaker that needs money, you'll always have to wait for people to see the plan, approve it, and then I hope it will be ready sooner than later. But
what would be the title of the film?
For now, the title is Khannea.
Right.
Yeah, because of course it's such a strong name, and also because it's all about like growth to this posthuman self that Khannea started to also find so much power in that name and in that character that's he's growing towards.
Well, I would like to follow this project so that if every now and then I could see a script, some ideas, what you are thinking of putting in the second half of the film. I would like very much to read it and maybe comment, because as I am imagining the documentary right now, is something that until a certain moment, perhaps 2023, perhaps 2024, follow the current version of Khannea. I can imagine that part of the film, because even if we haven't seen each other for a long time, I think since 2010 in Milan.
Yes.
I know more or less what you have been up to in the last few years, more or less. But now you said two very interesting things. One is that the film is going to continue in the future. And the other is that while the first part of the film documents the transition in real life of Khannea to transgender, the second fictional future part will document her transition to posthuman. And I'd like very much to hear more about both Khannea's future transhuman self and the future world where she will live?
From me or from Khannea?
From either or both.
Yeah, maybe it's interesting if you, Khannea, tell a bit first, and then I can explain what I, as a filmmaker, am doing with that image of yourself in the future.
If I would lay out like a story narrative of a sort of hypothetical life, you have to ask like very important questions: is how do you get there? I'm talking a future that's clearly over the horizon for a normal life, life duration, well over 100 years. That it assumes life extension.
Mhm.
It also assumes some augmentation of my body in whatever format. Then you have to ask yourself, what kind of world do we end up with? How do I maneuver that world in the current economic constraints that I'm in?
Hold on, if I can interrupt one moment.
Yeah.
Then you continue. So you said that you hope to live more than 100 years. And you also said that everyone will, so I guess that means that I'm also going to live more than 100 years. Now, that sounds interesting because, I do follow all these things, futuristic medical technology and all that, but myself, I don't have the impression that that is going to happen, not for our generation at least. Well, when it comes to Brian's generation, I don't know, perhaps yes. I guess yes. But I don't see any of these things really beginning to happen until late in the second half of the century. So it's very, you normally sound pessimistic, but in this aspect of things, you are quite more optimistic than me, I guess.
It's a premise for the movie specifically, and
Okay.
I don't want to argue the likelihood of life extension in whatever form. I think that the documentary leaves a few things open, so that might be like a terrorism kind of personality construct.
Mm-hmm.
Although I prefer to be there,
Mm-hmm.
but I wouldn't want to make a guess.
I see.
Let's say I'm distinctly less optimistic than Orby the Grey.
Right. And that's also my position as well. For the record, I'm going to say that, I've been writing about these things, I've been talking about these things, but while I do think that all these things like, indefinite life extension and immortality and mind uploading, living in the computer cloud and all that, I think all that is going to happen one day. But I do not think that day is going to be soon. Unfortunately, I'd like to be wrong, but I don't really believe that I will see these things myself with my eyes before logging off. Okay, this was an aside. Please go on, Khannea.
Let me recapture the chain of thought. Very important aspect is like the normal average life of like most people. How do you navigate a very rapidly changing and very, some might argue dangerous world? As we've seen in the last few years, a lot of people died. So this world is actually becoming more dangerous in some ways. Well, I still see myself in decades from now still living in some future form of Amsterdam for practical reasons, income. I see myself, if I get lucky in terms of life extension and in terms of augmentation, sort of low-key, in an intermediary or facilitating role or in a socially engineering role. And at some point I come to the realization, hey, I am now 120 or 130 or 140. I've exceeded any expectation. A very important aspect is not just living like that, but having that very compelling, urgent feeling in me that I've always had, being who I so desperately want to be, and that is a much more feminine frame, and of course a much prettier feminine frame. So a young woman in her early 20s, with a glint in the eye that betrays a much longer life and much different perspectives. Making use of all the pleasures of the world, and using to my benefit whatever friends I made and whatever insights I had and whatever legacy I built up over the years. Maybe even when my mind is clearer in an academic sense or in a business sense or in a, sort of like more powerful than I'm right now. But yeah, you would see cliches from several interesting TV series we've seen recently. Of course, we have the Blade Runner cliche. I was in love with Blade Runner 2049, but Westworld is a very solid set of images. You ask yourself, I personally am more about the transhuman, the transition itself, and maintaining a more or less biological body. I've never, like Philippe van Nedervelde says, I want to be a ball of light as quickly as possible. I do not underwrite his enthusiasm. Personally, I prefer a meaty body, a soft, pliant, resilient body, but where I can make use of what evolution tested before me. So maybe after a while 4 arms, but initially for at least a century or a bit longer, I want to maintain the humanoid form. Of course, better eyes, better ears, better limbs, better blood system, better liver. I need one at this stage. Like all the upgrades, as you would expect, like in the game Cyberpunk, but hopefully a little less dystopian. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's what.
One question before you start: do you hear any background noise coming from me?
No.
Not really, no.
No, that's great. So I don't have to unmute the micro. No, because my wife is listening to something in the other room. Okay, no background noise. That's great. So, well, that sounds good. So how are you going to convey all that in the film, Brian?
Yeah, well, we talked about this a lot, about the future, about how how a cyborg being in the like Khannea could look like, how she would move around, what place she would have in society, how she would interact with others. Like, we talked a lot about this, and of course there are so many interesting details about the future, about society, about what technologies could be used that all cannot be that cannot all be part of the film. So for me, it's about like setting a certain time, maybe 60, 70 years in the future, and that is a version that I could show. What could she be like, you know, and all the steps to become that person would be like an entire like series in itself, of course.
So it's not going to be a continuous thing. It's kind of like you stop now or next year and you restart 60 or 70 years in the future, right?
It's hard to you could see it more as like the journey to the future would be more like a metaphorical transition than a really narrative one where you see all the steps. So you could imagine Khannea driving around the hospital in 2020 or whatever, and going into a surgery room, and then we cut to a scene in the future where we are in a cyborg lab, and
right,
humans are still walked upon, and that would be in this case, Khannea in the future. So, so that's more how the film would work. And Khannea will be able to start her quest exploring her future self in the here and now, and then we, through like more surrealistic cinematography, we will end up with Khannea in that future, and she will like be part of that world as well. So we want to bring those domains together. So that's how the film will function in the end. But yeah, for me, I'm really the core of the project for me is like Khannea's talent to envision like a future self and to the growth toward that. So the whole world is like based around that character. So you would explore the future with the character going into a cyborg lab, going into like maybe walking in a landscape where you see in the background how to say a building site for space, a space elevator, for example. Going to a futuristic rave in which you see like other cyborg creatures that maybe look totally different. So the human life form is totally adjustable, you know. That's how you would explore the world, and you wouldn't maybe see the more classical sci-fi images like a city with flying cars and that kind of stuff, and then dive into a world and explore characters there. That's like another filmic approach. It's all based around like the personal growth and how to find how to become a post-human creature. That's
Wow.
more what it's like, because of course otherwise I would end up making like a Westworld series where you need multiple seasons to explore all these technologies, all these sociological aspects of a society and stuff, and that's not possible in one film.
Of course not.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
That really sounds very cool. I hope you'll be able to find the money to complete the film.
Yeah, we are working on it, and till now it's kind of successful, but you need patience.
Of course.
Yeah.
But you know, I want to give you an example of this visionary ability, as you say, of Khannea to reinvent herself. So, you know, when we first met in a virtual reality, Khannea would never have shown her face, would never had her listening to her voice, because you know, you kept your virtual self very separate from your real self, right?
I think that is very typical transgender stuff. Is that what you have is the body dysmorphia or the gender dysmorphia, is that you abhor that particular part of yourself. Transgenders, you see a lot of these phenomena and these urges very widely displayed. And at the time, I came from humble beginnings. I was specifically around the time we met, I was dirt poor. I was like as poor as you could be in the Netherlands. And there were weeks when I didn't eat much. That is like rock bottom in the Netherlands. Plus, some things happened where I suspect that there was a vindictive quality in the municipality I was in. I won't go into details, but it was I was convicted of some missteps. And I think that they were vindictive about it for some time. And with great difficulty, I succeeded in escaping that regimen. They gave me a Wajong. In Dutch, that is a disability, where you acknowledge 100% disability, where you acknowledge that you were disabled from youth. I don't think that was appreciated by the gemeente, the municipality where I was in. yeah, in retrospect, it made all the sense. I have cluster headaches. I came from a youth with severe physical and mental abuse. And yeah, that immediately results in something like depressions. I was in the time locked in a very unhappy marriage, although I at the time didn't realize it, but my marriage was horrible. She was very sick. Well, you got the tail end of that story, I remember.
Yes.
I was still married with her in 2005. But literally Second Life was instrumental in the end of that marriage because she saw me develop in a way that she couldn't handle. She at some point said, "I'm sorry, but I'm not a lesbian." Mm-hmm. Where she parsed my desires, my inner urgency very clearly. And yeah, we divorced as a result of that. But yeah, I set out from then on a little bit more optimistic than I'm now on that journey to the future, of course, influenced by terrorism a lot. And by I was increasingly a friend of Aubrey de Grey. And Aubrey de Grey has always been optimistic about our chances, remarkably optimistic still. He thinks that life extension will be commonplace in the 2030s. We both beg to differ.
I think Aubrey drinks too much. I always do that.
I agree. Yeah, Aubrey is. Okay.
Besides Aubrey, you also mentioned TerraSem. Of course, I'm very familiar with that, but perhaps Brian isn't, and some viewers are. So, could you maybe explain in your words what TerraSem is?
TerraSem was mostly the like a sort of a cloud of diverse projects. Mm-hmm. Like I would say the personal hobbies of Martine Rotlet and her friends. The ideological part was in large part filled in with the late Fred Chamberlain. He wrote a lot about how quick technology could accelerate. Again, overly optimistic. But I would say that mostly it was the hobbies of Martine and which she was willing to spend money on. So I talked with her a little about it, and she was like me, a Larry Niven fan, and an O'Neill fan, a Gerald K. O'Neill fan. Yeah, I think that is the most optimistic scenario you can envision for the future. So that is like a colonization of near space, industrialization of the solar system, cybernetics, virtual reality. But Fred especially took it off to an almost, I wouldn't say absurd, but surreal degree, where you say we probably are on the way to Alpha Centauri in a couple of decades. I wrote some stuff for TerraSem, including the idea that we would have space habitats later this century. I'm coming back on that assessment. But Elon Musk is still surprising us to this very day. Who knows what might happen? But it remains very important to emphasize that it is in large part a transgender thing. And second, I had at the time, 2005, I had the feeling that I mostly didn't live my life before that. So between the 1980s and 2010, I was so impoverished that the journey to Milan was already a breathtaking adventure for me. Martine paid for that journey, and that was exceeded any expectation. And after that, with the generosity of Dan Massey, I could visit America twice. Which also exceeded any expectation I had of my life at the time. So yeah, since 2010, around then, I have been on a lucky streak. Mm-hmm. And in many ways, I've exceeded any expectation of what I beforehand envisioned. I'm still alive. I wouldn't have thought so.
You're still alive and you look good.
I'm happy about myself. Yeah, happier than I was at the time.
Oh my God, that's something that I didn't hope to hear from you, that you're happy about yourself.
Happy about my life.
That's great.
But I still have a long way to go.
Of course, but there is this reason why I have always admired you a lot, and that is that. Well, we met in Second Life. I met an avatar. I met an avatar called Khannea Suntzu.
Yeah, that's my legal name now.
Right. That didn't want to have much to do with the real person behind the keyboard. For many years, I didn't know your real life name. But at some point, you decided, to export Khannea from the virtual world to the real world. And you started living in the real world. And there you managed to reconstruct a version of the virtual Khannea. And I see that this reconstruction is working well. And you say that is going to continue. You are going to reconstruct yourself more and more. And perhaps we will see in the next few decades something like the end of the film that Brian was describing. Well, I think this is real good. Real good. It deserves admiration. And I really think you have built a good life for yourself.
The last 10 years, I've been on a lucky streak, yeah. I had a lot of adventures. I had several dramatic relationships.
Dramatic.
Including, we talked about it, the story with Kim. It was very tragic how she ended. Horribly tragic.
Not everyone is going to be familiar with that. And, I could say something, but I don't really know what I can and what I should say or not. Maybe can you lead with something about Kim? It would be good to remember her online. Kim was a very sweet kid. I loved her. Yeah.
Kim, when I met her, was in Second Life, was a typical anime, virtual games, World of Warcraft, playing escapist kid. Living a very painful life in Mexico. Her dad was allegedly or arguably very difficult. Her dad was angry because Kim couldn't function in that particular environment. So she fled in a virtual existence. She spoke perfect English as a result. But she lived in complete isolation, foraging back and forth between dad, who lived in Cancun as a cook, I believe, and her mom, who lived in Mexico City. I saw her mom on a video once having a conversation, and I was very worried about Kim at the time in 2010. But I would say that it was sort of like an atavist worry about my ex-wife. My ex-wife was very sick. And for 10 years, I cared about my ex-wife, and I transplanted that care to Kim and after that, several other trans girls. So Kim was able to move to Washington, D.C., more luck than anything else. She lived a while in Washington, D.C., then she found her way to, I think, Mountain View near San Francisco.
I think we should skip a few years now because, you know, if you described those few years, you would have to name some people that perhaps we shouldn't name at this moment.
No.
So maybe can you just fast forward to the last couple of years of Kim's life?
As I heard from a mutual friend, Kim ended up in New York, got in a fight with a landlord. There was a lot of drugs involved. Kim was at the time having frequent psychotic episodes, was very sick, was using a lot of narcotic substances, including meth. She hinted at that she was having financial support at the time. She was disabled. She had her US passport. So she got in a fight with the landlord.
She had the US passport already.
Yeah, from 2014, 15, 16 something. But she was convicted, and she didn't want to show up because she used violence against the landlord, and he pressed charges. And she didn't want to show up at the court meeting because she was completely convinced that she would be sent to prison and for a long time. I think she threw something at the man. It was, of course, Kim was not a violent person at all, but the situation escalated, and I wouldn't call her rational at the time. She didn't reach out to me for help. I know that she reached out to a bunch of friends for help, but I don't think there was any reasonable pathway to help her. So she fled to Canada. In the bus ride to Canada, she took an overdose of drugs. That didn't work, so they pumped her stomach and put her back on the bus. She then ended up in one border town, Canada, where she ended up in a refugee or in a homeless camp. She lived a while in a tent, and then she took the final overdose of drugs, and she died. I hear that her mom went to Canada, paid for by the embassy, and identified her, and it must have been horrible.
Oh my God.
I saw some pictures of Kim, and yeah, she was, the last 5 years, she was very much lost. Yeah.
Oh my God. You know, that really makes me very deeply sad. I just met Kim once at this event in Milan that you referred to.
Yeah.
It was a conference called Transvision that I organized in Milan.
Yes.
A lot of friends were there. Martin was there, and Aubrey de Grey was there. Max Moore was there.
Yeah.
Dan Massey, that was where I met Dan Massey, Alison Gardner, lots of people, and Kim was there. She acted for a few days as a technical specialist in charge of many of the computer systems for the conference. I didn't see her after that. She emailed to me very seldom in the next few years. I think I didn't hear from her ever since 2016. Yes. But what I do remember is a very smart person and a very, very sweet kid.
Yeah.
Very sweet. I was deeply sad when I heard that she's gone. And
yes.
Well, you know, just thinking aloud about films about the future, what can happen in the future and all that. Now in Brian's film, we are going to see a future world where Khannea is there as some kind of cyborg, a human with human flesh, but perhaps some mechanical body parts, perhaps some brain augmentations, perhaps she's going to become technologically telepathic, something like that, which is, in some sense, the obvious continuation of her transition from yesterday's Khannea to today's Khannea. Now, just wildly imagining, I'm imagining a future world where Kim is still there with us. And, we may think, okay, that's not going to be possible because Kim was not cryonically frozen. She didn't leave behind the DNA, as far as I know. She didn't leave behind what Martin Rothblatt calls a mind file. So one would think, oh, okay, this future with Kim is just impossible. Now, myself, I like to think that is not necessarily the case. You're not going to be familiar with this very weird idea of mine, Brian, but Khannea is. I do think that some kind of very futuristic technology in the very, very far future is going to be able to bring the dead back, everyone who ever died from the past, bringing them back. And perhaps the world of tomorrow in the far future is going to be far too different from ours. So we would not feel at home if we were resurrected into that world. So perhaps they will put us back into some kind of virtual reality that looks like something halfway between today's world, to which we are used, and tomorrow's world, which we wouldn't be able to understand at all. It's nice to think about these things. Things that I cannot guarantee that is going to happen. I dedicate the largest part of my time to thinking about scientifically plausible ways for this to happen, but regardless of how it could be, I think that contemplating the idea and contemplating the possibility that people like Kim could be brought back to life somehow, that gives me a lot of peace and a lot of happiness. It gives me something to live for. Now, Khannea, I know that you don't really subscribe to these ideas, but maybe could you just, to satisfy my curiosity, could you say something about this? And you also after that, Brian.
What you are alluding to is if religion, specifically the Christian religion, because that's the most dominant one at the time, but you can easily extend this to the Buddhist religion as a sort of like a Freudian projection of our nature, our shamanic nature. So at one point we have to contend with our physical limitations, our biology, our procreation, our food, our shelter, our very base survival. But as an artifact or as a construct or as a maybe a failure mode, I don't know, we have a spiritual sense. We have at the back of our head, we have the sensation that a white bearded autocrat is whispering our ears. That may have evolutionary adaptations. We may have been in a bottleneck genetically for a few thousand years by tyrants, horrible men who instilled genetically in us the expectation that there is a white bearded autocrat behind us. We may now be, maybe, are venting these projections. And we may be trying to reverse engineer the world with a God, or with a Buddha, or with a Nirvana, or with a heaven. I'm all for that. I am very much into seeing God as a product, say I can subscribe to a particular model of God. Let's say Elon Musk and or Amazon may have different diametrically opposed gods, and I see religion as a consumer package where you can say, well, one version of me taken from the year 2007 and another version somehow extracted from the year 2022. Both are different, distinctly different versions. And then you introduce them in what you call, Nick Bostrom would say, a historical simulation, either material or partially material or completely virtual. And you have a branching version of you, several versions of you throughout history in sort of a slipstream forward. I think the movie Vanilla Sky hinted towards that. It's all very matrixy. But yeah, if we were to be able to reverse engineer divinity or afterlife, I would love to see that, and I would love to see the ironic aspects of that, like a talk show, various versions of God arguing about which of their products is the best available regimen.
That would be cool. Maybe, Brian, in the future you can do a film about this. But what are, I mean, I don't know how familiar you are with these things that we have been discussing, but what are your gut immediate reactions to these ideas?
Yeah, well, we talked about this like for like many dozens of hours over the last couple of years. But like, as I understand it, for like Khannea's future version is not like a pause. There's the version we are like creating in the film isn't going to stop living at a certain point and then reawaken sometime in the future. It's like a continuous version of Khannea. Yeah, that's the scenario we are like focusing on in the film. And of course you have a lot of like philosophical questions about what is that the same, would that be the same person, the same entity, or would that be like would that be Brian A and Brian B, and how are they connected? Of course there's also like some philosophical debates on that. But what for me is really interesting about the future and the cyborg future is we also talked a lot, like me and Khannea, about what is a meaningful life, what can meaningful lives be in the future. Khannea also talks a lot about that in her videos. And that is what for me is really important, like the cyborg as a take on how can lives be valuable and meaningful for everyone in the future. And it's also not just a technological take on the human form, but also like how can the world be more loving, be more meaningful for so many people that the world doesn't seem to offer a place for. And that's what's really interesting about this, for me, this idea of the cyborg as well, about how we can transform that, the more toxic like structures that are in the world right now, where so many people feel not a part of or not can't find. Yeah. So that is for me also really interesting about this the idea of the cyborg.
That's cool. No, I see that, oh, well, time is running. There were two other things that I wanted to discuss. Now, let's go very quickly about one. We can maybe talk another time about this, but let's make this quick. We have been reminiscing about Second Life. Now, that was looked like such a great thing in the mid-2000s. It was the future of the internet, and everyone thought that we were going to live in a virtual world all the time. And then it was a complete failure because, I mean, at the end of the day, people were just not interested enough. What I think now is that that kind of immersive environment, like Second Life or like one of the so many metaverses that are appearing now, it's something that is just too much for the very limited attention span of the people today. I mean, we just are too used to the kind of interaction that we have on Facebook, and a virtual world, a well-done virtual world, is as immersive as real life, which requires too much attention from most people. So I do not think that the metaverse will ever take off as a mass phenomenon. For specialized application, yes, but something like Neil Stephenson's metaverse, no, that won't exist. But Khannea, what do you think? Can something like the massively popular Second Life come back?
I completely don't agree with you. I think
you don't agree with me.
No, I think that Second Life was, of course, an aborted fetus. It was messy, it was chaotic, and the problem with Second Life is you couldn't commercialize it because there were too many troublemakers, too many people that were sexualized or engaging in taboo topics, including snuff, including severe violent sexuality. That makes Second Life completely unsuitable for any commercialized medium. But if you say, for instance, look at right now you have artificial intelligence where you can give simple instructions for artwork, and at the snip of a finger you have realistic artwork, including very detailed anatomical features. Shuon had recently made a statement about it. She said, I want to see an artwork and like this and this and this, and you see it. I think that it won't be 10 years before you can do the same in virtual spaces. I think in 10 years you will have warehouses with every item you can imagine, scanned casually, like telephones, cars, buildings. You have a Google warehouse where you have every building in the world, plus historical versions of that. People will take old video from the 1930s, 1920s, and reconstruct those virtual spaces real time, filling in gaps between years, because like there was a building in that video, 2 years later the building is gone. And then you can like extrapolate the transition between that, the breaking down the building. There was, for instance, a building next to Binnenhof in The Hague, right next to the water. And I saw a video of that building being broken down. And there was a beautiful sort of like a restaurant there next to the Gevangenenpoort. And I think that those restaurants, those places at some point will be reconstructed as virtual objects without any direct application. But the seductiveness, at least for a large part of the population, and the slowly decreasing bar of technology will scoop in people at some point. And it won't be 10 years, it won't be maybe not even 15 years, but before the middle of the century, I think significant percentages of our population will be in those low effort virtual spaces. Many of those spaces will be commercialized, sanitized, boring as fuck, but very Facebookized, so to speak. Meta. Well, but you will have private darknet, cookie cutter, not cookie cutter, but like cut and paste virtual spaces with their own game rules, maybe like derivative of existing games, like say certain games like Skyrim might at some point become a virtual space in itself, where you literally have Skyrim in much better graphics with waving trees and plants and everything, and walking, like animals walking around. where you, with current perception, your current eyes, wouldn't see that it is a virtual reality. Maybe before 2050. I see an enormous potential for these spaces to emerge. The Karens of 2050 will be bickering in those spaces. They will meet friends from the other side of the world in those spaces, standing there in their preferred avatar. This is going to, people are going to get scooped in. Of course, a whole bunch of people will not do this. They will refuse, they will come with conspiracy theories. A large percentage of the people will reject these developments, but I see Pandora's box is that the future is all about people making differing choices. So a lot of people will be in virtual spaces, a lot of people will modify themselves as furries, I don't know. And a lot of people will be boringly conservative from our perspective. I see much more diversity in that.
Yeah, I don't have any doubt that that's the direction technology seems to be evolving toward, and I don't have any doubt that by mid-century we will have the technology possibility of virtual worlds that are entirely indistinguishable from reality.
At least worlds.
At least as far the visual aspect is concerned. And after that, we're going to also have all the other sensorial aspects. I don't have any doubt that that's going to happen. But why shouldn't the same thing happen that happened in Second Life? If you go back 15 years in the past, Second Life was very good for the technology of that time. Yeah. Second Life was an excellent piece of technology. But what happened was that it was very addictive for a very small minority of people. But
I think you make a major cognitive mistake. People who stepped into Second Life are people with a reason to be there. So that either lonely people or people with, let's say, gender dysphoria. Second Life still has right now a very large population of trans people.
Right.
But you miss out on one very important aspect for the near future. It will be very easy and also very necessary to educate kids. And since the school system as we have it now is horribly dysfunctional in educating kids for the future, it creates cookie cutter, boring, dysfunctional people. Quite often, a lot of these people will be traumatized in the schools of the near future. And I think that the school system as we have it today will fail very quickly, let's say in the next decade. And the only alternative we have at that time will be a virtual system. Say, I want to learn mathematics or a foreign language or geography. You just let kids loose in virtual spaces of their time. And a whole generation of kids will grow up very soon. And I'm not talking 10 years, probably less than that, using those tools in school. And then the next generation after that will don't even bother dealing with school. They will do it at home. And that is the beginning. And then a generation will be accustomed to manipulating those environments in very creative and completely unforeseen ways. Like what we couldn't even envision in 2005, what's happening right now and is commonplace right now, we will have in 2030. And I believe that it is like a scoop. It is like an ice cream scoop where you take people and at some point you scoop out a certain demographic for whatever reason. It can be visualization for machining, or a repair company that wants to repair cars, and then you use virtual projection to visualize what's wrong with the car. So you don't have to train mechanics to understand all the minutiae. They literally see it. It becomes self-intuitive. And like normal education, but also visualization, also communication, also manipulation of data So you use algorithms to visualize data in schematics, and so you can look at it from 3D space. I think that we are ahead of a golden era in that regard. And it won't be anything like Second Life, although some aspects of Second Life may happen at some layers. The book Rainbow's End literally dealt with that. There were layers of virtual reality happening, or augmented reality happening at every moment. And the potential for conveying information, entertainment is so big. There's no way we can not have large sections of the population getting completely lost in there. Me, I'm done with that. I had my Second Life phase. I used it as a visualization tool. I used to fuck in Second Life. Now I fuck in reality.
That's great. You know, I really hope you are right.
I know, right? I just convinced you. I saw it.
Not entirely. You said some interesting things as usual, but you didn't really answer my objection, which was the fact that we had, we have a good technology now. We are going to have much better technology in the future, but we even had good enough technology in 2005. And that was not what people wanted. What people wanted was the kind of very low attention communications that we have on Facebook. Even this video conferencing is too much for many people.
Yeah, but that's oversimplified.
Why should that change?
About Second Life, when I did Second Life, I used my entire keyboard. There were shortcuts, there were a function to the control keys. If you were building, you were constantly manipulating the Second Life, the keyboard. If I would manipulate, say, the 3D software Maya, it's like nothing but that is niche. Such an application, Second Life or any 3D software is niche right now. That is for a specific purpose, for a specific mindset, for a specific urgency in your heart. But I believe that the interface for 3D manipulation, you've seen Cyberpunk 2049. I was smiling when I saw that. That woman, the daughter of Deckard. Did you remember this scene?
I think I did see some parts, but not all of it.
There was a beautiful, lonely girl, the daughter of Deckard, and the replicant, what was her name? I forgot. And she is in, because of a disease, she's locked in a bubble, literally a little dome. She has a disease, an autoimmune disease, where she dies if she's exposed to the real world. And she has a profession, a career in making virtual reality memories for replicants.
She's talking about Blade Runner, by the way, not about Cyber.
Blade Runner 2049. And she has a metal device in her hands where she literally composes reality, creates a cake in midair. I think that those interfaces, those intricate interface devices will just evaporate in the background, and it will be a literally spoken interface. Very quickly, gestural.
I agree with that one a lot on Khannea, because virtual environments now are the interface is often a problem to be totally immersed in there, and that's also why I don't often feel as part of the world. Sometimes it does. I had one really great virtual reality work by Laurie Anderson, an American artist, where the tools really helped you being like a being in that world. But I think if interfaces will be better, then definitely it will be more attractive to a lot of people. And
at some point, I guess we won't have any physical interface. We'll have just one interface inside the brain using brain implant technology. That would be the grandchildren of Elon Musk's Neuralink. And so, yes, perhaps at that point, by the end of the century, maybe, where you can manipulate a virtual world uniquely inside your head without any effort at all, then yes, perhaps that would be too much for anyone to resist. And then at that point, that future version of the neural metaverse would become a commonplace feature in the life of everyone. Well, unfortunately, I'm not so optimistic that I'm going to be around by 2100. Perhaps my resurrection copy.
Well, I think that even in the short term, the potential market for this kind of stuff, take for instance pornography, is so big and so seductive, and people will love to put their hands in virtual reality to manipulate whatever soft and hardware. Okay,
but so why aren't we seeing people buying in mass Oculus at the department store? I was at an electronic shop a couple of weeks ago. Yeah. And just by curiosity, I asked whether they had Oculus Quest 2, the new one. And they say, no, we don't carry it because there is no demand for it. We had these things for a good 7 or 8 years now. Why aren't people rushing to the electronic shops to buy this interface?
Literally the metaphor applies for a winged air flight. If Second Life was at the level of the Wright brothers, and we are now 10 years later, we have a world war with the first winged airplanes where they drop bombs and they use machine guns. Then we are, I don't know, 20 or 30 years from commercialized flight. I think you can put that analogy straight away. The first commercial, easy interface, casual use, affordable travel.
Okay, so you're saying you're saying we are not yet buying the interfaces because the interfaces are not yet good enough?
Categorically, yes.
I see.
Yeah.
Which is kind of hopeful because it lets us hope that with better interfaces and better software, this sector will finally take off. That would be good for us to think, because we have really spent many years of our life immersed in these environments.
I'm done with it. I am done with these environments.
So am I.
I don't even play games anymore. I want to feel a touch on my body.
You don't play games because you have made your life like a game, and that was really an excellent outcome, I believe.
Yeah.
Okay, guys, I will have to go, and but it's been really great to chat with you too, and I really look forward to knowing more about the film. Perhaps you can send me again the link to the website that you are mentioning with your previous work, and let's stay in touch and keep me posted about your project. Thank you very much for joining me.
Yeah, thank you very much for the invitation. I enjoyed a lot, and let's stay in touch, and yeah, see you next time.